Today, we're going to listen to Marshall Vian Summers, who has been communing with a particular group of extraterrestrial beings called the Allies for Humanity. This will be familiar to most of you because we heard once before from his son, Reed Summers, several weeks ago, some of the aspects of what these allies of humanity are communicating. But it's been Marshall that's had the most fundamental and ongoing contact as we begin to take in the complexity of this new world. That as we come into cosmic contact, we are coming into a challenging, very complicated terrain that we need to very clearly understand in order to respond in a way that protects human freedom and human sovereignty. So Marshall, I want to welcome you to our program. Marshall's going to say a few words of introduction, and then he will have some slides that he will show, and then we'll circle back for a dialogue with him for the balance of the time, and then he'll join the after chat at the end of our program. So Marshall, thank you so much for joining us today, and I turn the program over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. It's good to be here, and it's also good to speak with people who have an awareness that we're not alone, certainly not in the universe, but even within our own world, which creates a challenge and an opportunity that we've never had before. And this is going to be very important for us in our life now and in the future of humanity. So I think we are facing probably the greatest event in human history, the one that could have the greatest consequence, the greatest opportunity, the greatest difficulty even for the human family, not just at this moment, but in times to come. And it's very evident that humanity is unprepared for this. We're still engaged in political conflict, even tribal warfare. We're struggling now in a world of declining resources, which holds a greater risk of war in the future, as people struggle for food, water, and energy in a heating world that is something we have never had to deal with in the time of civilization. So these are momentous times, and we almost have to gear ourselves up for it and not just sit in the sidelines wishing for things to be the way they were or to be something other than they are. Because we have to face reality if we're going to serve in this world. And I think that's a calling that many people are feeling at different levels and different capacities today. My task is something very unique. I've been in a preparation that's been quite mysterious, but it's produced profound works. I feel it holds great bearing on the condition of the world today and the nature of contact that we're experiencing and have been experiencing now for 80 years in an active sense. My sources have been celestial, spiritual, but with the allies of humanity, also physical presence in the universe that wants to give us information that we can't attain ourselves, to help us clarify our understanding and give us a more powerful and authoritative approach to engaging with this greater community of intelligent life in which we live, some of whom are now present in our world and are very active here. Excuse me. To give you a little bit of background on me, after I graduated from the university, I spent a year teaching the visually handicapped, and was offered an opportunity to make that a career, but something inside of me said, no, that's not your mission, it's not your destiny. But during this time of working with the blind, teaching them living skills and travel, mobility, I began to hear an inner voice that began to tell me how to work with people in certain ways that were not scripted by any of the education I had had. And I began to utilize these messages to great effect. And that began to make me feel that there's something in me or around me that is perhaps enabling me to do things I had not considered before. I don't consider myself to be so brilliant that I could understand and apprehend everything that crosses my path. So to have some other source of information, either coming from within me or beyond or through me, was intriguing to me. And it became more powerful as I engaged with it. I was at the very beginning of developing a telepathic communication that would have a special and unique adaptation and purpose in the world. Certainly unique from other people who are developing these capabilities or have them natively. And as well, I'll present my the Allies briefings today, I think I can give you a scope of what that is designed to do and why it is important. I began teaching inner guidance training. I taught it for 6 years in several cities around the United States. I developed a curricula for it that was in much developed through this inner voice speaking to me, enabling me to establish a kind of training that has never really been given before. So I practiced this very consistently, full time. And that led to a turning point in my life where I began to realize that what I was engaged with was something of far greater significance than just empowering people to listen to their own inner guidance and how to access that inner guidance. And that I was now developing telepathic skills for a unique purpose and set of engagements, which would gradually be revealed to me over time. So these were kinds of things I could not really share with my family. I was always surrounded by people who were responding. So I had people to communicate with. And their response was an indicator that what I was sharing with them could be of vital importance to their personal lives and to their own journey, but also to things humanity will need to know in the future. Because we are engaged in contact and we are unprepared for this contact. And those who know more about it within government are not revealing what they know. But as I will say today, there's ways to circumvent that. There's ways now for us to be able to gain a clear understanding of the real picture without the government having to reveal what it's unwilling to reveal. So the early teachings in what I call the greater community way of knowledge began to be given to me, whole books of it regarding the cosmology and spirituality of life in the universe. Spirituality at a fundamental, elemental level, not spirituality at the level of what infinite number of nations may establish for themselves uniquely, but what is the common thread, the common denominator of spirituality in the universe? And how can that enable us to communicate with life in the universe and to understand their communication with us? So I was clearly on a path that no one around me was engaged with, and I had to hold true to that and be very consistent with my own development. This led, of course, to the reality of contact, the extraterrestrial, what I call an intervention in the world, and I'll explain to you why I call it that, and our future as we emerge into a larger arena of life in the universe, which I call the greater community. And one of the first things that was made clear to me is this universe is not a human universe. And our human values, assumptions, expectations, beliefs may hold little relevance there. So we have to be beginners now in learning about the greater community physically, its reality, and what it may present to us and what it may challenge us to do or to understand. So I was at the threshold always of learning something very new. And then over the course of time, which has now been 40 years, I've learned a great deal about establishing contact with this angelic presence in reference to receiving a preparation and education for our world's emergence into this greater community of intelligent life. Only a part of it dealing with the reality of contact. In fact, most of my writings talk about the greater community reality and spirituality in such a way that we can begin to prepare for it and understand it in order to be engaged with this larger arena of intelligent life. So at this point, I have 20 books in population, and I have students that I know of in over 96 countries. That is because the internet has been able me to share my work. I share it freely, and it's in translation. I have a wonderful network of translators who are now translating the new what I call the new message, which is the broader spectrum of my teachings, and the Allies of Humanity briefings, now into 30 languages. So this work now is for global purposes and for a global audience and for global relevance and certainly for our global future. So we're also during this time, I received a number of books of writings on the great change that is happening to our world, what I call the great waves of change, the impact that is having and could have and probably will have on the human family, and how that's connected to the experience of contact that we are having now, for they are both directly connected. So our future and destiny is a free race. I want to emphasize free. In the universe of intelligent life is really critical because freedom is rare in the universe as it is in our world. Why is it rare? Many factors, but one of which is freedom is very difficult to establish, very difficult to build, and very difficult to maintain. It requires a great deal of cooperation between people. It's not forced or required. It requires a great deal of external factors that would force a native people such as ourselves, we are the native peoples of this world at this point, to have to work in cooperation with each other in order to survive and to become a free world in this universe where freedom is rare. The situation now is happening in our world. So we have 80 years of the phenomenon of contact. Contact that does not reveal its presence, its purpose, its agenda, or what its overall aims and goals are. I call that an intervention, not only because it's non-disclosing, but because it's also taken up residence in our world. 80 years of presence is not a visitation, it's a habitation with a purpose. It's been revealed to me that there are multiple groups involved in this, but all with the same purpose, which I'll be talking about today. Operating in great secrecy, non-disclosure. What the government knows is now being withheld from us for purposes we can explore. But it's the alien secrecy that has created our government secrecy. That's very important to understand. The secrecy began with them, not with us. Obviously, what they're hiding from us is something that our government doesn't even want the public to know. Why? Because it's very challenging to us, to how we think, what we believe, and our lack of preparedness for this great threshold that we're involved in. You know, great events don't happen when we're ready. They just happen, and we're either ready for them or we're not. Contact is a great event for which we are not ready. And this engages a large part of my work as a contributing factor to establishing the exigency of the situation and what we're going to have to do to prepare and why we need to prepare. So contact is now happening at a time of great global change, conflict, and disruption. We have a slide. First, world wars of the 20th century. World wars, changing the whole face of the world. The development and use of nuclear weapons. A worldwide environmental destruction. Alteration of the Earth's climate. Globalization and growing connection and cooperation among countries. Technological developments. Global infrastructure and the integration of systems, communication, and technology. To go on, we have another slide. Describes declining resources. This is the exigency of our world's problems. Climate change and catastrophic weather. Economic hardship and instability. War and escalating conflict that are now happening in our midst. Loss of arable land and fresh water. Collapse of biodiversity, destruction of our natural habitat, and pandemic disease, which, by the way, is not over. Here, we as humanity, as a human family, are highly vulnerable to visitation from non-human intelligences of unknown intent, capabilities, and agenda. So here we enter the allies of humanity. They came into my life very uniquely after I'd been receiving the greater community teachings for 15 years. I was asked to receive a group of off-planet observers, asked by the angelic presence to receive a group of off-planet observers who had an important message for humanity, who call themselves the allies of humanity. Slide. I'll read this comment, which was written by me. Over 27 years ago, a group of individuals from several different worlds gathered at a discrete location in our solar system near the Earth for the purpose of observing the alien visitation that is occurring in our world. From their hidden vantage point, they were able to determine the identity, organization, and intentions of those visiting our world and monitor the visitors' activities. This group of observers call themselves the Allies of Humanity. This is a group of observers that have been sent to give us information we would not be able to have otherwise. For we are limited by the fact that we're on the surface of our world and cannot go into space to really understand the reality of intelligent life there, the interactions between different nations and groups of intelligent life. So we're getting about half of the picture that we need to have to be able to understand the nature of this intervention, why it is occurring, what it is doing, and what it seeks to achieve. So the Allies of Humanity now are giving us information from the outside looking in. They're not neutral in the sense that they're completely neutral, but they tell us very clearly from the outset that humanity is not ready for contact. We do not have the species maturity. We do not have the organization or unity as a spiritual family. We're not ready for contact, but contact is being thrust upon us. So I'd like to talk now, another slide, about the Allies of Humanity briefing, giving you a picture of when they were received. 4 sets of the Allies of Humanity briefings given over a 20-year period with little contact with me in between. Allies 1 given over a 3-year period from 1996 to 1998 with a Q&A section added later. Allies 2, year 2000, all 6 briefings given in 24 hours. Allies 3 in 2008, all 6 briefings given in 24 hours with a Q&A added later. And lastly, Allies 4, 2016, all 16 briefings received in 24 hours. I must say at the beginning of this request to receive this off-planet source, I was very resistant. I was already very burdened with the angelic message I had been given, which now contained many different books. And this was a whole nother thing that I was going to have to be responsible for. It's not just a matter of receiving it. I was going to have to learn it, understand it, and present it on an ongoing basis. So it reminds me when heaven asks us something to do, it's not a gift of freedom, it's a burden of responsibility. Something that very few people, I think, really can understand. However, the briefings, I did receive them, the first set of briefings, and it had a profound impact on me. It had such a great impact that I had to receive these 6 briefings over a 2-year period. It so altered my understanding of where we stand in the universe, what we're facing in the universe, and certainly confirmed what I had been received before from the angelic presence, but went much further regarding the existential reality that we are in. In order for me to receive these briefings, and I want to mention this because it's really interesting, a non-technical channel was established with the angelic presence to enable the connection to occur through means which could not be intercepted or tracked by any physical entity. The angelic assembly, who's what I call them, prepared me for this contact experience. And the voice that I heard was so very different from the angelic presence, because the angelic presence envelops me powerfully, almost overwhelmingly, and communicates me in a state of, you could say, embrace, but also envelopment. But the allies were like speaking a distant voice from far, far away, speaking through, it sounds like a mechanical translator. I could hear it, but it was faint. And my process was to hear, listen, receive, and record. So recorded everything. And as I began to build my link to this foreign voice, this became very instantaneous and spontaneous. And so then the voice, just the words began to flow through me. My development as my skills in developing this kind of communication enabled me to do that. I listened and recorded everything they said. It quickly just became an instant dictation, as I mentioned. These recordings were transcribed and later given in a series of books as I received these briefings over time. Today, the briefings have been translated in 29 languages, and over 96 countries are engaging with them. The Allies of Humanity represents an observational assessment of the alien visitation in our world. An assessment that will give us information we do not have and may fill in some of the missing pieces that make understanding this phenomenon much more difficult than it could be. I consider this a whistleblower act from an off-planet observer. Slide. Our task is to reveal the real nature of the interventions occurring in the world today, to warn you and to prepare you for the realities of life in the universe, and to give you a greater impetus for human unity and cooperation, and to show you the great need for the cessation of conflict in your world. This is taken from Book 3, First Briefing, The Reality of Life in the Universe. As I mentioned, the problem with understanding this visitation intervention is we don't see the whole picture. We know nothing about life in the universe. Certainly it's being acknowledged that life is probably more prevalent in the universe than we thought before, given the astronomical advances that have been made recently. But the engagement with life in the universe, that's an unknown to us. We can only see from what's happening on the surface of the Earth. We know nothing about what's going on beyond. And as a result, we project our values and our assumptions and our beliefs onto this blank canvas of the universe that we know nothing about. But as I said, it is a non-human universe we will be contacting. And our own beliefs and self-importance and values may mean very little there. However, despite these limitations, I view life in the universe as a reality of nature, just like the reality of nature here on our Earth. The fact that there is advanced technology in vast distances, incomprehensible distances, it is still the same nature that we and all beings in the universe are part of. And this will be an important reference point for us going forward in our journey to understand this presence intervention and how we should respond to it. So as Jim mentioned, there's 4 fundamental questions regarding contact. What is happening? Why is it happening? What does it mean? And how should we respond? Over 70 years of honest UFO research, we've only been able to come to an agreement about the first question. We're being visited by physical craft. We can understand a lot of their dynamics of travel, their engagements with people on the ground. A great deal has been established around this first question, what is happening? But we know very little about the other 3 questions, have not clearly been defined for us. I know that certain people have ventured there, certainly, but to have a consensus on that has not been established. Why is it happening? What does it mean? And how should we respond? So the Allies briefings reveals the activities of the intervention in a very clear and prosaic manner. Over 80 years of intervention, this is a group in a reality we've never experienced in the world before. Though the world has been visited over millennia for many different reasons, an intervention of this nature has never been attempted here. And the reason for that is humanity has created a technological and practical establishment on Earth that other races can use, which was not the case before. We've established growing sophisticated means of communication, travel, engagement, everything, trade, everything, for some foreign source to utilize. And so that is why, plus the advent of nuclear weapons, why we have the intervention we have in the world today. They've come uninvited, in secret, non-disclosing, without human awareness of consent. Through this, they've engaged with people in very hazardous ways, which I will talk about. And they've established different activities of the intervention. And the activities of the intervention, first of all, is involved inducing certain individuals in power in the realm of government, commerce, and religion. Certain individuals, not everyone. Because these individuals have the most influence over the thinking and response of humanity to this unseen presence. They've created hidden establishments in the world from which to operate in a clandestine manner, most predominantly now in the oceans. Though previously they established some underground facilities, which probably may not no longer be used, I don't know. But certainly The evidence we have of underground habitation, underground facilities is becoming ever more evident. They're actively manipulating our religious impulses and values in order to turn our allegiance to them or to think that they're of higher spiritual nature or quality. And many people do believe that. Lastly, they're taking people against their will in a human abduction program, a hybridization program for the purpose of altering the human genome for future purposes, which we will talk about as I go on. These activities represent intervention in human affairs in a deeply alarming, if taken seriously. Slide. The first UFO underground bases were established in the oceans and shallow waters, away from the presence of human military forces, in the Arctic regions, in areas where there is no military establishment. Bases underground, which are far more difficult to establish, have been built in mountain regions. Transmitters have been established in mountain regions that have cities at their base, transmitters to affect the mental environment and pacify the public. This represents one of the efforts of the intervention. So the question comes up, are any of the visitors beneficial to humanity? I know that many people feel that some of them should be or could be, but this slide gives us a different picture. No one who is visiting your world now or in recent times is beneficial to humanity. They all represent competing forces vying for power and influence here. They are part of the intervention, which is made up of more than one race. This is from Book 3, 7th briefing in a Q&A. This is very different from earlier visitations, as I mentioned. Nothing like this has ever happened in the world before, because we've created a technology and a civilization other races can now use. We're also threatening the health and value of this world through degradation and also the threat of nuclear war. These are things that have brought these forces here. Slide, please. Those who are intervening in your world today do not represent races who have visited long ago, and thus have no right or claim to this planet or to any inherent association with the human family. This is Book 3, 6th briefing, Greater Community Realities. All other foreign races who were here previously, some of which beneficially, have withdrawn in the face of this intervention, giving us a very clear picture of who is here, which would be very difficult to discern if there were positive races still involved here. And how could there be positive races involved here if you have an intervention such as this taking place? So it gives us an unambiguous picture about the nature of the visitors. It was something that we would not be able to have otherwise. This is very important because there's a lot of confusion about this. I want to make this very clear that you're not here to observe us. 80 years of presence is not observation. Listen, we're not that important in the universe. No group of nations is going to come here to observe us for 80 years or try to help us become a healthy race. Now, you're assuming way too much self-importance here. No race is going to do that, ever. The race who have come here have come for their own purposes, and we are part of their purpose. This is habitation, not a visitation. There are current factors that the intervention is using to support its presence here. First is climate change leading to societal breakdown. Resource depletion in our world, societal breakdown. The risk of war over the remaining resources, societal breakdown. Why are they doing this? To establish an ongoing presence in the world from which to carry out clandestine activities without human awareness and approval. Our world holds strategic value to the intervention, and they're influencing leaders in government, commerce, and religion to aid them in this. This is very important to understand. This is not a Star Wars universe we're emerging into, where we just blow up planets, we take each other by force, and endless military engagements in space. That's where we're coming from. That's our mentality. No, it's power in the mental environment, power of persuasion, power to induce certain experiences and feelings for people, power to win people over without the use of force. Remember, they're here for the value of the planet. They're going to need us as a workforce. They don't want to destroy either of those two things. So we have to really come to terms now. We're dealing with an intelligent and very well organized set of influences in our world. It is not operating in ways that we're used to dealing with. It is not operating through power and domination by force. It is through persuasion and inducement that this is taking place. Slide. In recent times, there's been a shift to influence those positions of leadership in commerce, where they are not accountable to the public. They are unelected and go largely unrecognized by the human population. They garner great wealth, and they do not claim to have great scruples, such as your elected officials might proclaim. They can operate in secrecy with very little accountability to anyone. So there's then the problem of manipulating our spiritual values. We are spiritual people. We believe in the unseen. We believe in things that are fantastic and great and marvelous. I relate to that. But that can also be used to harness our approval and even our faith in them. There's a whole host of ideas that have come into our sphere through spiritual teachings, recent spiritual teachings, that advocate that everything happens for a purpose. We just need to be open and not resist. Use love, not fear. That's not how a discerning person operates in a physical reality. Doesn't show the kind of caution and care that we need to bring to this situation and to all the problems facing us in life. Slide. While the intervention will present itself to its believers and its advocates as benign and a spiritual force, in reality, it will be supporting the very forces that undermine humanity's integrity, its unity, and self-confidence. And this involves spawning countless conspiracy theories, turning us against our leaders, our institutions, our norms of civilization, creating a vacuum of confidence for the intervention to fill. If you can convince people not to believe in their government, or believe in their traditions, or believe in their just norms of society, they're going to believe in something. People have to always believe in something. It has to be something bigger than them. I don't care what you say. Certain people say, oh, I don't believe anything bigger than me, but they do. They really do. And this is one of the vulnerabilities that our unguarded spiritual understanding is creating for us. So why? Why is this happening now? I'm going to talk more about that. Could have happened 100 years ago. Why it didn't? Could have happened 1,000 years ago. Why it didn't? First of all, we have built a planetary infrastructure and communication system they can use. They can utilize to manage and to control us. Without knowing it, we have done the work for them. We're failing to manage our societies effectively. They promise to do this for us. We should beware. We're rapidly degrading the world that is desired by others, and that is why they have come. The two world wars activated the arrival of the current intervention, and the risk of nuclear war threatens the value of this world and their usefulness to us. This all speaks to our exigency today in the most important ways: war, nuclear war, environmental decline, economic decline, the struggle over resources. I mean, these are the things that are governing almost everything happening on the planet. The wars we have today are about resources or about land and domination of land. So we're on a shrinking island in the world with a growing population. So this is a perfect opportunity for intervention, a divide and conquer strategy. And we know about divide and conquer strategies because they've been utilized almost continuously in the time of human civilization, usually by force, but not always. Today, the conqueror of today has a laptop and a cell phone. They're going to make your nation dependent upon its economy, your own economy. So conquest is now becoming more subtle, more invasive, less obvious, but it's still occurring. So I'd like to talk now about what the Allies briefings are revealing that we don't know, probably can't know. First is they're clarifying the activities, limitations, and purpose of the intervention. 80 years of UFO research hasn't clarified that, not convincingly. We're still all over the place about what is happening, why is it happening, what does it mean, and how should we respond. Our world exists in a largely inhabited region of space where war is suppressed but where nations actively trade and compete. Big, huge trade networks, and we're in the vicinity of those. And they give us both benefits and hazards, which I'll talk about. We know nothing about that. It's just a big empty space out there to us. But that has everything to do with why the intervention is here, how it can function, and what limits its abilities. Those intervening our world today are working for larger powers and vast trading networks, whose member nations must use intermediaries, such as those intervening in our world, to cast influence here. Invasion is not allowed in this region of space. Invasion is not allowed. Intervention? Maybe. Therefore, other means have to be employed to gain dominance here. Intervention, if you can convince the native peoples that they should accept your presence, or they're not going to complain about it, that gives you a green light to continue in your activities as far as these larger powers are concerned. And these rules of engagement are established to maintain peace amongst trading nations, some of which were former enemies of each other. We're not talking about some small thing here. There may be 500 worlds in this trading network. I mean, it's bigger than anything we can even imagine. It's highly organized and highly controlled. We happen to be a free, undominated world within this sphere, but we're not beyond its influence. So the thing, again, the allies emphasize, and that I want to emphasize, is that no race should be visiting our shores. Humanity is not ready for contact, but contact is being forced upon us. That alone should be a moment of caution, big time caution. In fact, we should look at this thing very cautiously, very suspiciously for a long time. If it's for our benefit, it has to prove it. And as of this point, it's proving the absolute obvious opposite of that. Slide. It's from the Allies briefings. At this point, humanity is not ready for contact, and that is one of the reasons why the intervention is inappropriate and unethical. Humanity is unable to engage wisely with the greater community. It lacks the maturity, the unity, the strength, and the discernment to be able to do this effectively. To engage with humanity under these circumstances is to take advantage of its weakness and its lack of wisdom and expertise. This intervention is playing a long game in our world. What's a long game? A long game is you have long-term goals, and you're willing to take a lot of time to achieve them based upon the circumstances that you're engaged with. With humanity, most of our goals are short-term goals. We want to achieve this by this point in time, immediately or soon. Long-range goals are something much, much bigger than that. And it makes it harder for us to understand that because the progress in achieving those goals is very incremental and very slow. And we don't see it and recognize that it's actually part of that process. So when someone's around you playing a long game and you're playing a short game, their activities can go unrecognized and undeciphered. There's a history in war that demonstrates this in our own relatively current times. In Vietnam, the United States was playing a short-term game. You have to win the war within a certain amount of time. To the Viet Cong, they will take whatever time it takes. It takes 20 years, they're still fighting. And they defeated us because they're playing a long game. We were playing a short game. So the long game is very important because the intervening forces know that they must win us over without the use of force. How are they going to do that? By persuasion, on one hand, for those who can respond, and by discouragement for those who cannot respond. Those who want to respond, oh, they're here for us. This is great. We'll be able to do so much. They can help us. To those who don't want to respond, they're here. We can't do anything. They've already taken over. It's all over. So you can see how easy it is at the mental level to encourage people in ways they shouldn't be encouraged and discourage other people in ways they should not be discouraged. But in the mental environment, it's the unseen environment of persuasion. And we know about this. We use it to persuade our children. We try to persuade each other. Governments try to persuade the thinking of their populations. I mean, this is very well established in the world, but not at this level. You're going to persuade an entire world that outnumbers you tremendously and that you cannot conquer by force, really, with what you have. It's going to have to be through the mental environment that this takes place. And this is something that, is goes sight unseen. You just feel it, you sense it, perhaps. You have feelings that are not your own, perhaps. What's making you feel the way you are, not sure. You can cast influence over many people without ever knowing where it comes from. Maybe they assign it to other people, other factors. Maybe they blame it upon themselves. But not everything we think and feel is coming from us because we live in a mental environment, a human mental environment, and we're impacted by that environment daily, almost constantly. To be able to engage in this long game, they're going to use cunning, deception, and the promises of peace, wealth, and power to build their presence in the world. And they will await the time when human civilization will decline. Climate change, resource depletion, the impacts of war and conflict, to a point where they can announce themselves openly or assume powers behind the scenes. Because by that point, we will be too weak to resist or too unable to resist. But it takes a long time to prepare for that eventuality. And that is a realistic eventuality. Climate change isn't just about it's warmer today than it was 5 years ago. Climate change could destroy a massive amount of the world's fresh water and agriculture. Think what that would do. To make living in certain parts of the world uninhabitable, where millions and tens of millions of people live. Then what are you going to do? Climate change is huge. We're creating it, but they're using it to their benefit. You know, they've been watching us for 100 years. We've been broadcasting out into space through various means, ever-growing means, for 100 years, telling the discrete observer everywhere about who we are, how we behave, our conflicts, our problems, our failures, how we're destructing the world, destroying the world, how we destroy each other. So you can imagine that a discrete observer would, over time, gain a pretty low opinion of us. Wow, they're intelligent, but they're warlike and destructive. And they're destroying a planet of incredible value. I mean, planet Earth is like a jewel in the universe. You know, you might get a planet like this out of 1 in 10 or 20,000 planets, if that. So we have been educating them about us unknowingly and continue to do so. So they came here well prepared for us, but we're not prepared for them. They know how we think. They may not understand our spirituality or our deeper nature, but they know what motivates us, what confuses us, what attracts us, what discourages us, and they know our behavior, all which can be used to promote themselves in competition or in contrast to all of that. So here we have to be very careful because the intervention has its own narrative to people that it influences and people, obviously people it takes on board their craft, but people that they are able to communicate through, so through their associates and emissaries on Earth, people who believe in them. And this is going on all the time everywhere. And so one of the things that's important to know here is what they do, not what they say. What they do, not what they say. What do they do? They establish a long-term presence here to establish itself in the world without our permission, whether we like it or not. They claim to come in peace, but actively take people against their will and subject some to cruel experiments. We know this in the abduction phenomenon, which we'll talk about. They've been manipulating the nuclear launch facilities and to demonstrate the ability to control our actions. In extreme case, they actually set the nuclear facility in Ukraine under Russian domination at the time to launch in Ukraine in 1982, put their staff in absolute hysteria to try to shut it down, but only the spacecraft near them could do that. And at the last moment, they shut down the launch. This is happening, people. What does this mean? They're doing this to protect us? No, they're doing it to show us their force. This a peaceful nation of loving spiritual beings? No. This is an intervening force to use technological power to either impress us or discourage us or make us feel like it's hopeless to resist. That actually happened. The Russian government actually contacted the US government to alert us to this at that time. I don't know if that would happen today, but it happened then. We have provocations in the nation's airspace. We have threatening behavior about military aircraft and naval operations as a demonstration of power. This is going on. This is being filmed now. It's being presented. We need to pay attention to this. This is the behavior. Behavior denotes intent. Narrative does not denote intent. You could say, well, they're not attacking us, so they must be our friends. But that's illogical because it ignores all of the possibilities in between. Oh, okay, they're not harming us, so they want us to think they're our friends, but what they're really doing to us is undermining us, slowly but surely taking advantage of our weaknesses, our conflicts, and our vulnerabilities. So I mentioned before, we've been broadcasting out into space, telling them all about us. Unknowingly, of course. So now they have a pretty good understanding of how to influence human beings and actually how to establish a presence in the world. And through their conspiracy theories, which I'm well aware of, some of whose authors claim to have ET contacts, they're beginning to break down social fabric in our world. And even the occurrences of our world are breaking down social fabric. People feel ever more helpless and hopeless in the face of, climate change and war and competition between nations and so forth. And I want to say that these conflicts, as long as they're not nuclear, support the intervention. Ukraine war, sure. Gaza, sure. Weakens the human fabric, pulls in humanity's most powerful nations in a way that degrades their military and their strength and and actually their national prestige. So this is undermining us using our behavior, promoting our behavior. I'm not saying they're causing it all. I want to make that point, but they're certainly promoting and enhancing it to their benefit. Our decline, our conflict benefits them. So they're amplifying human behavior and failure while promoting the intervention's claims of being here to save humanity and to restore the world. That is their narrative to the people that they take or who they influence. And behind the scenes, they're building a multi-generational hybridization program to create a new human hybrid ET leadership for the world to govern us. They can't live here. These beings live in probably sterile environments in space, either all the time or most of the time. And our world is a biological hazard to them, phenomenally so. I once read in Journals of Science that it's estimated that the world has 1,300,000 organisms that could potentially be harmful to humanity. Harmful, turn into pandemics, illnesses. 1,300,000. We've only ever studied 30,000 of them. Immunologists study this stuff. This is a biohazard to be in the world, which is why it probably wasn't colonized before. So they need a human leadership that's bonded to them, that's part of them, but looks human. That can live in our world, that can adapt to this environment. So we have to understand here, we are only important to them to maximize the value of the world. We are a resource to be used. They can't live here. They can't operate the infrastructure we've created. They need us to do it. But only through this kind of leadership can that be done. So this brings us to a very clear point that I want to make, and this is shocking to many people, is that they're here for the world. They're not here for us. And you may not agree with this. You may even feel violently opposed to this. But if you can see this, you will understand the nature of their visitation here far more clearly and why they're behaving the way they do, why they're acting the way they are, and why they've been here so long in such an undisclosed manner. So I'd like to go through some of our errors in understanding the visitation with some of my own comments associated with them. First, we are rooting the world. We need their help, wisdom, and technology. Yet to do this, they would have to take over the world. It's a nice promise, but to do this, they'd have to take over the world. All the reins of power, all forms of authorship and power in the world. Next, they're here to save us from ourselves. This is what people believe and want to believe, and also what they're supported in believing by the intervention. They're here to save us from ourselves. We're going to destroy ourselves. How could they do this except by taking over and controlling our actions? If we're so out of control in their viewpoint, how would they control us? Except by taking us over completely. Next, they have high technology. They must be able to do almost anything to help us. There's no evidence of this. It's wishful thinking, dangerous assumptions. With them, we could travel into the universe. They could take us to the universe. It's wishful thinking. Since they are not attacking us, they must be friendly. I mentioned this before. That's illogical because it ignores all the possibilities in between. You would likely never assume a person's your friend if they weren't attacking you, because friendship is based upon cooperation, communication, association, openness, things that the intervention is not displaying. So why do we assume this about an interfering power that doesn't disclose itself? So they emphasize that our governments are corrupt, our visitors are peaceful, don't trust the government. Yet there's no evidence that visitors are peaceful. And what have they done to demonstrate this, except by not attacking us? They're actually doing very violent things to people they capture, people they abduct, things they foment in the world, very violent. Then people say, our governments are preventing the visitors from helping us. No, the intervention is acting above and beyond our governments with their own agenda. So here I need to really emphasize the importance of facing the intervention as intervention, because if we don't, we're falling right into the agenda of the intervention, which is an agenda of persuasion. It's been cast all over the world, very successfully, by the way. And while maybe the majority of the population doesn't want to think about this reality, the people who are most likely to be interested in it are certainly the first to respond, the first to be notified. So remember, behavior denotes intent. It's what people do, not what they say, not what they want you to believe. It's what they do. These are the crimes that they commit. And here I want to emphasize another point that is very important for us to understand. To see this objectively, objective means you have no preferences. To see this objectively, you cannot want anything from it. If you want something from the intervention, you're within their realm of control, your sphere of influence. If you want whatever it is, resources, technology, salvation, peace on earth, whatever their narrative is, you want that. And your wanting that makes you begin to unite with them or associate with them in your own mind. Next, humanity must learn to save itself. No one is going to come here to save us. That is very important to understand. There's no saviors out there. Even the allies of humanity are saying, we're not here to save you. We're here to inform you, because no one's going to come and save you. So we can't be weak and pathetic and like, help, help, come and save us. We have to be the opposite. We have to become strong and determined and resilient. The intervention will undermine all the nations in this world, all. You're facing the same outcome of domination everywhere. So while they may use one nation more than another, in the end, it is their dominance here they're here to establish. And I'll say this, facing the intervention, understanding it as intervention, is the one thing that can finally unite a fractured humanity in its own defense. I can think of nothing else that can unite humanity in its increasingly divisive and contentious state of being. Climate change can set us in resource wars with each other. Economic collapse is always dangerous in terms of fomenting warfare. And when people give up hope, they give themselves over to other powers, human powers or other powers, mindlessly and with terrible consequences. So we're facing a real unite or fail reality for humanity. And we have time to deal with it. It's not too late, but it is late. We can't playing around in the weeds about, oh, they're here, some are here to help us, and some are here not to help. No, we have to get out of that and get serious about dealing with this thing as it's demonstrating itself to us. If we did this, we could end conflict in the world, not immediately, but over time, because every nation is facing intervention. And we all need to support each other and cooperate in order to counteract the intervention. This is the gift, the hidden gift of intervention. It's not their intention, of course. This is the hidden gift of intervention, is it can unite the opposition, unite us. What else would unite us? Everything else will break us down. Only this can unite us. And this is the unintended gift of the intervention to a struggling humanity. These are lessons now that we have to learn. We have to use nature as our own example. Species to species contact over the natural history of our world demonstrates that one species will dominate the other in whatever realm of nature they're participating. You can't argue with that. That's evolution. And the same may be true here. And we shouldn't ignore this. We shouldn't ignore the history of nature or the history of intervention in our world. These are massive demonstrations of the force of power from those who are stronger upon those who are weaker. And ignore those at our own peril. So what this brings us down to is what the Allies emphasize is the power of knowledge within us. Knowledge being the core of our spirituality, the part of us that cannot be turned, the part of us that cannot be influenced, the part of us that represents the real core of spirituality in the entire universe amongst advanced races. We have this power. Spirituality has not died out in this world as it has in so many other worlds. We have this power. We have the history of intervention in our world to teach us about intervention. We have the history of our natural history to teach us about competition between species. These should be part of our assessment tools, not just groping for something and lunging towards something because you think it will help you. We have a serious intruder in the house dividing us against each other and weakening us. We have the strength and need to resist this and to show resistance. If we show resistance to the great network of trade, then we will be respected if we defend ourselves in this way. This is how, without the use of force or military power, we can end the intervention in the world today. It's in our power to do this by our decisions, by our resistance, and by our assertion that we are a free and determined race and do not welcome intervention of any kind in our world. This will be respected amongst higher powers, physical powers in the universe around us. But if we do nothing, if we acquiesce, if we just let things happen, then it's telling them that this is happening with our approval. Without resistance, there's approval. So we have the power to resist, and we're not using it. And while they may control the skies with their extremely fast craft, they have no control over the ground and can't even enter this sphere outside their own ships for very long. So this is the existential reality that we need to deal with. And we need to deal with it as an existential reality and not as, some kind of adventure in consciousness. No, this is humanity. And this is the one thing that will prepare us for life in the universe. At present, we are too weak, too divided, too self-obsessed to become a free race in the universe. To be a free race in the universe, you have to be determined, you have to be sufficiently united, you have to be organized, and you have to understand your boundaries to space and make sure that nobody transgresses those boundaries. That's what's required of all free races in the universe. The Allies of briefings talk about it in terms of unity, cooperation, and discretion. Actually, unity, use of your own resources, and discretion. Unity means you work together. Using your own resources means you don't get pulled into networks of trade, which makes you dependent upon other nations. And discretion means you're not sending out into space all the information about your conflicts here on Earth, as we've been doing for 100 years. So this is what it will take for us to become a mature race. And this is what is before us now, a great challenge, a great threat for which people are unprepared. And very few people even looking at this phenomenon, in my view, are really coming to terms with what this is squarely enough to be able to see it for what it is. We're still in the exploratory phase. We're still dealing with possibilities. We're beyond all that. We're now in probabilities and realities. That should be our approach. And the blessing is with us if we can do that. So again, humanity is not ready for contact, but contact's being thrust upon us. Any visitor will have intent. Do not think otherwise. We need to know that intent before we give our permission for that visitor to come here. That is our right and responsibility as the stewards of this world and native peoples of this world. This empowers us to deal with the threat and challenge of intervention, and it also enables us to begin to establish what it will take to be a free race in the universe, which is not an easy task, but one that will transform us in the ways that is most beneficial and most assuring to our future and freedom in this universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall, very much.
Okay.
I want to, it's hard to know where to dive in, given the enormous amount that you covered. But let me just start in with some of the questions that have been indicated in the chat by a couple of people. And these are just clarifying questions so that we can understand exactly what you're saying and what you're not saying. Are you indicating that all the various extraterrestrial beings have the same agenda? Or are you saying that there's a predominant group that has this agenda while others may not? Because it's clear that there's indication that there's a range of different kinds of non-human intelligences that are here. Do you group them all together into a single motivation?
Well, what I'll say is that in order to create an unambiguous situation for us, we'll never tell friend from foe by just watching spacecraft fly across the sky. So in the face of this intervention, which is big and powerful, all other races who might have been helpful or just merely being observing have withdrawn from the world, giving us an unambiguous picture of who's here. They're all competing for the same thing here, which is the value of this world. And they're all recognizing that they can't live here. They need us to help them do that. So to the degree to which they're cooperating or competing is something that, well, it may change depending on how we respond to them. But we are dealing with an unambiguous situation. If you make it ambiguous, then this whole thing goes out of focus. Now, who are the good guys and what are they doing and who are the bad guys? That's not what we're facing. I have to really emphasize that. It's not what we want. We want good guys to come here. We want positive contact. I want positive contact. But the contact we're having now is not positive. It's dangerous. It's secretive. And it's working against us in all ways. So we have to get beyond that notion of, well, good guys, bad guys. If we don't do that, then we're still in the weeds with this thing. And we're not going to come to any meaningful conclusions. You can't imagine that a positive force could coexist with a negative force around our world. That would be warfare, or that would be conflict. So obviously, that is not the case. And so I think we need to come to terms with that, because otherwise we're not going to get clear about what we need to do. We're going to respond to those forces differently. But that's not what we're facing right now. This is a determined intervention, well established in the world, growing every year, taking more people against their will every year, impacting more people every year, has no interest in our religion, has no interest in our governments, in our theories, in our education. We're merely a workforce for them to use. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow. It's almost like overwhelming. But if we don't get to that point, after 80 years of looking at this, we're going to be no further down the road, in my opinion. We have an unequivocal situation and challenge before us.
Yeah, so in your mind, it is sort of a monolithic presence that we're dealing with in terms of intent. And the human race needs to understand that their agenda is not supportive of future human growth and development, but rather to manipulate humanity so that
put it like this. No race is going to be here for 80 years just observing us or trying to help us. We're not that important in the universe. We're not the center of the universe. We're a warring set of tribes on a planet that's valued by others. That's the reality. Period. If we don't get to that point, I'm telling you, and I've 80 years of UFO research, it's not getting there. Conference I've been to, people aren't getting there. Presenters aren't getting there. It's almost like we're still kind of dealing with an ambiguous situation, what we think is ambiguous, which is not. The force is not monolithic in its size or its physical presence, but its influence is becoming monolithic. Imagine how you can influence so many people through such secretive means. Media does it all the time. Governments do it all the time. People fall in line. They believe because it's just more comfortable or more socially acceptable to fall in line. Or to look at the alternative is just too scary, too unnerving. People don't want to go there, so they don't go there. I mean, our human psychology is very fragile. And we're dealing with something beyond us that has power, not, well, it's a concentrated power. I'm not saying they're innately more powerful than we are, but they concentrate this power. They have a group mind power, which has tremendous influence over an individual. So this is power in the universe, by the way. Part of our lesson in learning in entering the greater community. It's not a war it's not Star Wars reality out there. It's a competition of intent and purpose, competition in the mental environment. What's the greatest weapon in the world? It's to make your adversary not want to fight. The art of war. See, this is the game. This is where they're operating from, and we easily fall into their plan unless we have a certain amount of information and awareness, and we can't afford to do that. I think we're at a pivotal point now where we really must get down to it, and it doesn't have to be a final decision, but it has to be a high probability. There's no evidence they've ever done anything for us. Anything. So let's deal with a high probability. I'm not asking people to believe, but to walk around this. No matter what your point of view about this, you need to consider the things that I'm saying today, because if we don't get this, and this is the truth, it's going to have huge consequences for everybody. So I'm posing this as an opportunity to see something and think about something. We have another quote I'd like to post now. If enough people can become strong with knowledge and learn about the greater community, then humanity will not succumb. It will resist the intervention. And its resistance will demonstrate to the governors of trade and commerce in the universe that humanity is a self-determined race, does not will to be interfered with or controlled by foreign powers. This will give you strength and respect, which at this moment you do not have.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's where, at least in my mind, I would welcome further clarity from you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because right now, what we see around the world is ceaseless war, conflict, and with climate change, the reality that humanity and many of the million other species that are under threat are about ready to self-destruct. As I read the history of the past 40 or 50 years, it feels as if this has been done by humans to humans, just out of the momentum of our own geography, history, culture, and traditions of conflict. Explain how within this situation an alien presence would manipulate it. Are they beaming mental telepathic messages into Joe Biden and the White House, or Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping? Are they manipulating from a sort of a secret mountain base? Do they have the capacity to influence people, let's say the World Economic Forum, which is the source of many of the concerns around? How do you understand their influence actually working? For example, on the hybrids, there's a lot of stories about the hybrids, but apparently the hybrids that people have seen, you can see pretty clearly and immediately that they are not really human. But they look like human, but you can just feel intuitively that they're not. So how do you understand, Marshall, how this influencing is taking place, not whether it is, let's assume that what you're saying is true, but how it is.
How it is. Well, these are really good questions. And I think this is a lot of walk around to think about this. I'm not saying they're causing all these wars, but these wars are benefiting their agenda and their narrative.
Yeah.
They say,
Yeah.
look at you, you're destroying each other, you're destroying the world. Look at us, we have no war. We're not attacking you. See, the contrast between your behavior and what we want to present, what they want to present themselves to us as, is such a huge contrast. But on the other hand, part of the use of hybrids in the world now has not been leaders of nations, but those who advise them, who are individuals you never see, who are in the background at all times. This is where a hybrid becomes, and they're very skillful at mental persuasion, by the way. And they can grow up and go through our educational system very effectively and be very persuasive. Other people can be persuasive if they're very obsessive, but the hybrid has some kind of special skills that enables them to be particularly persuasive, and they can be behind the scenes. You know, all leaders have individuals like this behind the scenes advising them. And some of them aren't like national security advisors, you know, not have a political appointee. They're individuals that work in the background. You know, Roosevelt during World War II had an advisor like this. I forget his name. Critically important to Roosevelt's decisions and
Hopkins. I think
understanding
his
of the
name
war.
was Hopkins.
Hopkins, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is very common. This is where ultimately the hybrid doesn't want to be a leader of a nation. That's too, because they'll be witnessed, they'll be seen. They won't, something's not right about this person. Everyone will see that. Enough people can see that. But somebody hidden behind the scenes, or somebody who starts spiritual communities, it teaches to be peaceful and accepting of all things. You see what I'm saying? Never resist anything. See what I mean? I mean, there's so many ways that we can work, they can work with human psychology to make us compliant and accepting. And so they're certainly taking advantage of our behavior to their advantage. And they can induce through hybridization or other means the decisions of some leaders that are themselves very given to warfare or aggression, like Vladimir Putin, for example. He's feel very, very wronged by the West, and now he's going to take his revenge, and he's not going to give up his war against, it's really a war against the West, that's what it is. This is a far bigger situation than Gaza, by the way, because the whole world, this is going to generate world war. Gaza is not going to generate world war. It's a regional thing without any kind of obvious resolution.
Let me
So the
just
promises of peace, I want to say the promises of peace, power, and dominance to leaders is very powerful, particularly in a war of increasing conflict and competition and discord. And so you win these leaders over, and they may not believe in you, they may not even know about you as an intervening force, but you are doing, their will is now being channeled into you through those who advise you as a leader, for example. So I'm not saying the leaders are, you know, hybrids or they're in contact with aliens. I'm saying they can be easily influenced by advisors who are through networks of, people all have networks of information and influence. Leaders all do, not just one individual, but whole groups of people
Sure.
informing them, guiding them,
Sure.
warning them. So this is how you influence leaders' decisions. And the thing about commerce, I read that quote from the briefings is important because these people have no accountability. And
Well,
a lot of the UFO, I'll share this with you. A lot of the UFO information that's been gathered by the government is now in the hands of commercial forces with no government oversight. Get
yeah.
that? That's big. So we think things are big. The war in Gaza, that's big to them, and it's horrifying, but that's not big in the world. That's a conflict that's been going on ever since Israel became a state, and it's just becoming more grim and gruesome. Other wars now, struggle with China over the South China Sea. Now you're talking war stuff. That's bigger. Okay.
Well, that would be an
The
interesting
intervention is about, it wants us to decline without destroying the value of the world or us as a workforce. It wants to reduce the human population, not by them, but by us with each other. It serves their purpose to do that. Otherwise, you have 8 billion unruly human beings. How do you manage them?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a related question. There's been a number of questions in the chat. Most recent one was by Janice Hall around the multiplicity of people who have also had, as you have, different channeling experience with different, let's call them non-human intelligences. And she referenced the indigenous people, for example, in North America, who for generations have been talking with what they call the star people. So that there's whole peoples with ongoing communication with non-human intelligences. And you have a number of people that have been channeling specific sort of avatar extraterrestrial beings. Many of them have very different messages. Some of them, for example, with the indigenous and the star people, they give ongoing advice for how to live life and how to develop certain values and so forth and so on. I think what's not unique, but of distinction in terms of your channeling is it's coming from a very specific group of ETs that are warning us about something that's taking place of which we're largely unaware. So how do you draw a distinction, Marshall, between what you're receiving through your channeling and the other channels? There's hundreds of them out there that are, most of which are asserting that the extraterrestrial presence is in fact benign. And that we should be opening ourselves up to them because they're here to help us go to the next phase of growth and development as the human race. How do you understand your uniqueness within the larger reporting of these kinds of experiences?
Well, it's interesting you bringing that up, and I'm well aware of what you're talking about, by the way. And I was instructed early on that one of the first groups that the intervention wanted to influence was seers and people who could, be connected to higher levels of intelligence to become their representatives and so forth. And this is the co-opting of clairvoyance, for example, has been a part of the intervention strategy, because these people will give testimony to the beneficence of the intervention. And they come to it, that's their belief. We have New Age beliefs that everything happens for a purpose. Higher powers are here to help us. We can't help ourselves. That's a very old thing to be able to take advantage of. All I have to say is look at nature, look at history, and look at the evidence of what this different ET presence in the world is doing. Regarding native spirituality, I have high regard for that. But what's the difference between an ET and a spiritual force? They're not the same. So they're being guided by spiritual forces. Certainly, I respect that. But to call that an ET force is like, they're not the same. ET forces are physical. We're talking about physical beings. Okay. The other thing I didn't talk about today was this is multi-dimensional beings. They're not coming from another dimension. They're physical beings in physical reality dealing with physical needs. That has to be your starting point. Otherwise, you're never going to go anywhere with this. If it goes interdimensional, then they could never be a threat to us because they're interdimensional. And it's kind of really groovy to think about that, but it doesn't really give you any insight into the behavior of those in our world today.
So in your view, these are physical beings from physical locations
Absolutely.
in
That
our
has to be your
quadrant of the
starting point.
galaxy.
That has to be your starting point. I mean, if
Gotcha.
you have a burglar in your house, you're going to say, well, maybe this is a spiritual being. Maybe this is an interdimensional being. See what I mean? You immediately disempower yourself from dealing with a situation by casting into it all these different possibilities,
Right.
which are very enticing and maybe hold true at some other level. But if we're to understand this intervention and respond to it appropriately and wisely, we have to know that it is a physical presence from a physical place for physical purposes, operating in physical ways. Now, some of those ways may look magical to us, and we may ascribe that to multidimensionality or so forth. Advanced technology indistinguishable from magic. I forget who said that, but that was an interesting quote that to us, it looks magical. Wow, they can do this, they can do that. But that's physical competence. They're 1,000 years ahead of us, technology. But technology advances is not spiritual advancement, nor is it moral advancement.
Yeah,
Got to understand that. There's so many points that I could have emphasized today. I didn't have time to emphasize. So we look at, spirit, technological advancement as wow, this must mean this and it must mean that. It just means technological advancement.
gotcha.
And they have power in the mental environment, which we
Yeah.
know about. We just haven't developed it to the same kind of level that they use it.
Well, just a final area I'd love to have your further comment on, then we can close this off and move to the after chat. And that is, I think there's a growing sense of despair around the world, both in terms of the young people, where polls are showing, upwards of 65% believe that, we're heading into a catastrophic disaster. We've got, increasing warning about the destructive consequences of not dealing with climate change. We've been talking about the Kogi prophecy that have come out of Colombia, where we're now in our final reckoning. Humanity Rising itself was established on the understanding that our governments are no longer willing or capable of solving any of our problems. So somehow humanity has to rise. So I think humanity is at a point of intuitive self-awareness that the situation now has spun out of control, and the prevailing institutions are no longer capable of effective response. That's part of what I was alluding to at the beginning of my program, even in something as obvious as Gaza. The prevailing institutions aren't doing anything to actually either even ameliorate, let alone solve the problem. So this is a perfect cauldron within which some third element can insert themselves and be hailed as the deliverer if they only kind of begin to turn things around. So presumably in your worldview, the beings that are engaging in the intervention are in the process of using humanity's duress to create a situation where we would welcome their intervention as actually a salvation for the fact that we can't do it ourselves. That's the moment.
That's the perception. That's the moment. How do you look at the history of Cortez and the Aztecs? How could 450 men with a couple of cannons overcome a nation of millions? It was the most powerful military nation in that whole region of the world. Through guile, through cunning, by divide and conquer. Took them a lot of time to do that. It cost them a lot of their own lives to do that. We think that might makes right, but in the universe, it's a whole different thing. So we have to grow up. We are going to go through a really hard time of degradation. I think you have to accept that. Some people will not be able to adapt to that. No force is going to come in and solve Gaza, external force. These two forces are been at odds with each other. They keep fighting each other. They're going to have to come to their own resolution, whatever it may be. So there's much bigger things afoot right now. The future of humanity is at foot. Even a climate change could devastate much of the world's population eventually. But nothing is as hazardous as an intervention of this nature, which could affect every person very consequentially, permanently. So this is the message. I know it's hard for people to put their arms around this, and it took me a long time to come to terms with this. I had to do it in stages. But the fact of the intervention, its behavior, its intent, its activities, are all pointing in the direction that I'm talking about. And if you look at the weakness of humanity, this is the perfect entry point for intervention. When we're losing faith in each other, losing faith in our leaders, their institutions, we're being supported to lose our faith in all of these things. People lose the faith in themselves. I don't know what to believe. I feel lost. I can't come to any conclusions.
Yeah.
The people go on the internet and try to have the internet tell them what to think and what to do, which is pretty disastrous. Artificial intelligence can be used against us very effectively in this way too. So I'm about returning power to people, innate power, spiritual power we were given, us, all of us innately, that waits to be discovered because this is immune to influence. It holds a clear pathway for a person's life. It's not an easy pathway to follow, but nothing's easy now. Forget the easy, forget the comfortable. That's over. We're in a cataclysmic world, and you have to be pretty strong and determined to deal with it. And I say no one should be visiting our world this time unless they're here for their own purposes, which is not appropriate. Humanity's going to have to win its own freedom. It's going to have to rebuild its own society. We're going to have to go through a period of, contraction, basically, before we can do that. And hopefully not destroy ourselves or create unnecessary, untold damage in the process. But that's where we're at as an evolutionary process. To get ready in the universe, we have no chance of being a free race universe given where we're at now. We'd be overtaken by whoever wants to invest the time and energy to do it. And they'd probably do it the same way it's being done today, given the value of the world. So we're going to have to forge that unity ourselves. No one's going to come and save us. And I think if people don't remember one thing, you have to remember that. No one's going to come and save you from the universe. In fact, you're sitting on a planet desired by others. So, I mean, in a way, you're going to have to establish your own self as a force, and you're going to have to establish your own rules of engagement, which is a whole other part of my teaching about the greater community, our emergence in the greater community, is our own rules of engagement, how we should treat and conduct ourselves with all the power that we have. And we still own the surface of our world. It's still ours, hasn't been given over. So this is what's really going on in my view. And I know other people have different views, and that's fine. But don't think that any power is ever going to come and save you, particularly if they're hidden and non-disclosing and are working behind the scenes. Those are all clues of malfeasance, in my view. And so I want people to entertain the things I've said today. I'm not asking for people to believe or adopt, but you have to look at this critically. You have to look at this as a threat to humanity, because if you don't, you're not being responsible. This is what history and nature have taught us about intervention. It must be always considered seriously at the outset. And if we don't consider that, we do so at our own peril. And that's not what I want to see happen to us. We're intelligent beings. We don't fully use our intelligence as we have it. And we need to this is a process of everybody growing up into a larger arena of life, which is where our destiny lies. And I support us all preparing for that destiny and taking our rightful place as a free race within it.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
This has been very sobering. Someone indicated it was a bit depressing to take this in, but I want to comment, everyone, on closing that these are the kinds of conversations we now need to have as we enter into humanity's ET moment. We need to move beyond retrieve spacecraft and retrieve biologics, as they're called, to these deeper questions of what's going on, why is it going on, what does it mean, and how should humanity be responding? So Marshall has a very specific point of view. It's important in our view for people to take this seriously. In fact, both Reed Summers and Marshall Summers are going to be preparing courses for the new Paradigm Institute certificate program in extraterrestrial studies. It's not the whole story, but it's an important part of the kinds of ways that we need to be dialoguing about this phenomenon that we don't understand, and we really don't know what we don't know yet. So when we put these kinds of sessions into our programming, we're doing so in the spirit of truth pursued, not truth possessed. But it's certainly something that all of us need to consider very, very deeply. So thank you,
Jim.
Marshall.
I'd just like to mention how people can learn more about the Allies and all my work in general,
Sure.
the Allies of Humanity. You can just search that on the internet. All the briefings are up there to be read by anybody. They're also in translation. I gladly give them free to the world. And also the new message teachings, much of them have been produced, over 20 books now containing them, talking about all aspects of our life, but particularly about our future and destiny in a greater community of life. And it's there for people to explore, and there's much to explore. I mean, we can only cover certain things today that would fill in the picture. The picture is very big, and we need to take the time to understand it for ourselves.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, everyone. This will bring us to a close for today. You're all welcome to the after session chat. Marshall will join for a bit. You'll see the link in the chat box, and you received it in your Zoom reminders for today. And then tomorrow, we're going to look more closely at not only Gaza, but the Ukraine with a seasoned CIA and U.S. military special forces operative for nearly 30 years, a gentleman named Larry Johnson, who will be commenting on these major areas of regional conflict. Thank you, Marshall. Great session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye for now, everyone. See you tomorrow.